So once all the models are in the scene in Houdini and have been exported from Maya, and most of them are in there, this is the stage that I'd probably start blocking out the lighting. So let's do that. Jump into the ROPnet, and this is where our ROPs will live, so kind of like our render settings or render layers in Maya. I'll drop down a Redshift custom ROP. We'll call this lighting for now. Where it says render cam in the main, we'll load in our render cam, export relative path. Go to the output tab and I'll turn off render to end play. I never use this feature. Another thing I'll do is go to optimizations and global overrides, and we'll turn off subsurface scattering. We'll turn off tessellation displacement. So a lot of these assets in the scene, I've added tessellation to them to subdivide the models at render time, and that's really going to slow the render down. So when we're sort of blocking out the lighting, we want the lighting stage to be as fast as possible. We don't want to slow that down. So we'll disable emission and we'll disable refractions. We don't need that either. Once you've done that, we'll drop down a material network to apply a grey shader to every single object in the scene. So we call grey matte. Jump inside, drop down an RS material, and we'll call this grey. Make sure the color is set to white, so 1 by 1 by 1, and I usually drop the weight down to 18% grey. The roughness I usually set to sort of like a middle value, so around 0.5 roughness, and the BRDF to GGX for slightly more realistic reflections. The rest of it can be left as is. I've just fired up Nuke, and what we're going to do is we're going to convert the HDRI to the ACES color space, which is nice and easy. So I'm going to load in a HDRI, which I downloaded from hdriskies.com. I'd also really recommend paying HDRI Haven a visit, because all of their content is absolutely incredible. It's really high quality and it's all free. So you can grab this HDRI from HDRI Skies and it's free. It's like a 2K version. So let's load that in. The first thing I always do when I'm converting my textures to the ACES color space is load this raw data. Then I drop down an OCIO color space node, and this is a linearized image already. So what we do is we say the input, so this image is in a linear color space or linear sRGB, so utility linear sRGB, and the output is ACCG, so we go from here to here. Next we drop down a write node, and we're just going to write this out as an EXR. So I create a folder called ACCG. I wrote this out with the same name, underscore ACCG.EXR, like that. Say overwrite, and I tick this write ACES compliant EXR here. Make sure the color space is set to default ACCG or ACES and then ACCG, for example, and then just hit render, and that's pretty much it. So before we import the HDRI, I'm going to take this RS material and I'm going to apply it to all the materials in the scene. I found that when I rendered using this override scene materials, it wasn't working for me very well. Some materials were inheriting this material and others weren't. So I turned it off, and instead we can just select all of the materials in the scene, grab them all. I've also removed all of the proxies for now, I'm going to show you guys how to render out proxies later on. But I think for the lighting, we'll focus on sort of the basic elements, just so we can work a little bit quicker. I think that looks to be all the objects. Yeah, that looks fine. And then what we can do is go to the render tab. So they're all still selected. Click this option box, go to the material network, sorry, the object network, gray, and we'll assign that gray material to everything. So now all the objects have the gray material applied. Okay, so we're finally onto the lighting, which is cool. Let's drop down an RS, so redshift light dome. I usually color my lights like a yellow color. So if anyone jumps into the scene, they know that these are lights. We'll go to the shader tab, import the HDRI that we converted to the ACES color space, ACES 236. I'm going to zoom out, check out the concept, and we're going to try and be as faithful to this concept as possible in terms of lighting. And we can see that it's sort of going off at a slight angle here. It's not dead straight coming down this alleyway. There's a little bit of an angle which adds a little bit of interest. And this angle is sort of aiming towards this table and chairs, which sort of directs the eye, which I think is really nice. So with that said, go to the transform tab on the light dome and middle mouse click on rotate Y. And we're just going to rotate this around. I think we're going to rotate it around to somewhere like this area here in the sky. Keep going. Yeah, I think somewhere around there. 105 degrees is fine. Yeah, that's looking okay. I'm going to open up the redshift render view. Make sure this is always on top. Select the lighting ROP. It looks like this has picked up actually all of the grey material, which is good. We can see that this is sort of reverted back to sRGB color space, and that's wrong. We don't want to be using that. I never use a linear sRGB color space. I use ACES. So I'm just going to refire that off. Load the ACES config. So I've put this config file in this folder here, and you can download this from GitHub. Just make sure that when you do load it, it says ACES 1.03. It's not ACES RRT, so it's ACES 1.03. So that's the one you want to load in, and we'll turn off enable post effects. So let's refire that off. And also make sure that your view transform is set to sRGB. And for some reason, in my scene, this keeps reverting back, which is a little bit frustrating. I'm not sure if there is a setting here to define the color space. For some reason it keeps getting reverted here, which is a little bit annoying. So I'm going to save out a preset here, and I'm going to call this ACES CG or ACES. Let's go 1.0.3. So every time we can just load that preset here. Let's refire that off, see if this snaps back. And I think that's a little bit of a bug in Redshift, and that's quite frustrating. Let's load it again, see if that works. Okay, so hopefully this should be fine now. We'll close the window. We can see straight away that the light is way too dark. So we'll boost up the exposure to around, I think around 2. We'll try that. It's a little bit brighter. We'll turn on bucket rendering just to clear that progressive noise. Just going to double check that this is still using sRGB. Yep, could be quite stubborn. It wants to revert. So that's looking pretty cool, but it looks kind of dark. So let's boost this up again to 2.5. That's looking better already. And we don't want anything falling into darkness because that looks very amateur, especially on sort of a daylit scene like this. Everything should be lifted. Another thing we should consider is that we're not using global illumination right now, so we're losing all those nice bounces that we get. Just bear in mind that when we do turn on global illumination, that our render times are going to get a lot higher. So we'll jump into the ROPNet, lighting, Redshift, global illumination. I set the bounces to 2. I think I explained this earlier, that there's no real need to increase this because you can't really tell in most cases. Usually it's the difference is negligible. So let's turn on, we'll pause the render, take a snapshot, and we'll turn on brute force as the primary GI. And towards the end of this, towards the end of the shot and towards the end of the tutorial, we'll change this to irradiance caching. So if I switch back, you can see here we're getting that nice bit of bounce there, nice bit of bounce light, and that's really helping sort of sell the realism that little bit more. There's nothing worse than really black shadows. It just looks really unprofessional. So just watch out for that and watch out for things falling into darkness. Let's also try turning on brute force as a secondary GI engine. So that's going to give us even more bounce. But the issue with this is that when we're working with brute force GI, it's going to get noisier. It's going to get more difficult to clean. Our render times are going to get higher. So even though we get more of a realistic sort of lighting scenario, our render times are going to be pretty high. So if we take a snapshot, we can see that took 16 seconds there. I'm just a little bit paranoid right now about this switching back to sRGB because that can really mess up the workflow if you start lighting in the wrong color space. So let's just compare that. That took 27 seconds. And we can see a little bit more bounce there. This is going to be a lot more noticeable when we've got textures and materials in there. So right now, I'm not seeing a huge difference there, so we can turn that off, and that's going to save us a bit of time when we're moving lights around. So the next thing to do will be to move on to adding in the sunlight. Let's drop down an RS sunlight. Color this yellow as well. We'll go over to the environment shader. We don't need this, so we'll turn that off. So we don't need any environment shader in the sky. You know, we're using the HDRI for that. And towards the end, we'll actually turn all of it off, so the sky is actually black, so that we can composite our own sky in comp. We'll leave the intensity multiplier set to 1 for now. That's fine. And what we'll do, I think we'll just nudge this into place. I'm just going to move this sort of in the area that the sun is coming from. Just going to rotate that now. Excuse me. So we rotate this, I don't know, somewhere around this kind of angle. And it should be quite high in the sky. I mean, it sort of seems to me this is shot at around maybe 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. You know, shadows are quite long, which means that I think the sun is setting just a little bit. So I don't think it's too late in the day, as there's a lot of ambience. And that's one thing to watch out for, sort of knowing what type of day your concept is painted in. It's very important. So if this was getting later towards the night, then you'd want to set your light dome, the exposure on your light dome, to a little bit darker. The tint would be probably bluer, but in this particular case, because the sun's higher in the sky, there's a lot more ambience, there's a lot more warmth. So what we'll probably end up doing is adding a little bit of color to this tint on the HDRI. But first we'll mess around with the sunlight first, and we'll just see what that's doing for now. So we've got our shot here with the HDRI lighting it on its own. Let's see what it looks like with the sunlight. So that's looking really cool. That just adds a lot to it already. Gives it a lot of shape. Let's just try rotating this. We can keep taking snapshots to see the progress. What we should also do as well is, when you're modeling, it's really important to model the buildings with the correct height, really, as they'll also be casting shadows into the scene. So I guess this building to me would probably be the same height as this building here. So what we can do is just turn on the box that I made for this. It's just a really simple basic box, and it's not even visible in primary or secondary rays. It's just casting shadows onto the scene. So this is what happens when we add that box in. Let's turn it off to see the difference. So we'll take a snapshot, turn it off. So you can see that's making a fair amount of difference there. So we'll turn it back on. And you guys can have a mess around with that if you want. So you can move the box closer in, you can move it further out if you want more light to enter the scene. I'm just going to move this off screen a moment and take a look at my light. I think the light is traveling too far across here, so we need to turn the light around this way more. We can actually pause the render if it's taking too long. So let's just see how that looks. So we'll take a snapshot, render, and all I'm doing is just trying to match the concept. Just keep looking back at the concept, keep trying to match the light direction. So this is getting better. It's still too much going at this angle. So let's pause it again. We'll stop the render. Rotate the light around this way more. Refire it off. And this will actually be, I mean, it's depending on how many assets you have in your scene. This should be a lot quicker with less assets and a lot more responsive, but we got a fair amount in there. I think overall that's actually looking really cool. The way the light is hitting the table looks really nice. I think that looks really cool. Yeah, I like that. I think that looks really nice. So that light angle is looking really nice. Let's hit render again. And we have an awful lot of light hitting this building here and a lot of light hitting the back building. So we need to sort of add like a light blocker sort of up by here above this main building to block the light from hitting here. So this should be the main thing that is being lit. And always remember that we're directing the eye, we're telling the eye where to look. If we light up everything in the scene, then we're sort of telling the viewer, look wherever you want. You know, we sort of want to guide the eye and direct the eye towards the table. So that's the main focus in the shot. And that's really important when you're lighting. Always consider your focal point and light based on your focal point. So just remember to guide the viewer's eye where you want them to look. That's a very important part of lighting professionally. It's thinking about that sort of in advance and not trying to light everything up. It's not always about adding insane amount of rim lights, but it is about focusing the attention on a certain asset. In this case, it's the canopy, it's the table, and everything else is just sort of there as extra detail to fill the scene. So from this point, I made another box. So just a massive box like this. And this just blocks the light. So you can see it's a really, really big blocker here, which I put in. And you can kind of see if we save that snapshot. Let's just move this box down just to see the effect. So you can see what's happening here. And what I wanted in this case, I'm not sure why I thought like this, but I sort of wanted the light to, or the shadow to go halfway cutting through these windows. I thought that looked kind of interesting, so I just basically shifted this up like this until I got it sort of halfway along there. I thought that looked really cool. I think based on the concept, there is light hitting here, which is right, but there's also this light hitting sort of in here, like this circular light, you know, which is being sort of, you know, which is archway is sort of casting a shadow, and there's sort of like this section of light lighting up the back of this wall. But I decided not to put that in the end. I didn't want to fake it too much. I think, you know, I'm happy adding like shadows in and whatnot, but what I'm not happy doing is adding in like additional sunlights, because then things can start to look a little bit fake. And I think keeping things simpler is much better. Let's go back to this previous image. Just want to see what I did there. Yeah, I think that's looking really cool. You can try shifting the box. You can try shifting it sideways more. See the effect it gives. So you can see here we've casting a shadow there, but then this kind of tells the viewer, hey, look at me in this area, and we don't really want that. We want to keep the focus here. So let's undo that. And there's sort of just a little bit of light picking out here, but not too much. So it's sort of on the edge of the frame. You know, we don't want to draw attention to areas that we don't want the viewer to look at. So anyway, enough of me rambling on about directing the viewer's eye. Let's have a mess around with the color now. I think overall there is a lot of blue in this HDRI. So we can see it in the shadows. It's really strong and it just looks very cold. So let's take a look at the concept again. and my computer is running a little bit slow right now. So we can see everything's very well illuminated, and it's also very lifted. It's warm. It has sort of like more goldeny kind of tones, and ours is more blue, and it's cold. So what I do is I go to the RS Light Dome. I apologize for my computer being very sluggish right now. Let's pause that. We can just inject a little bit of warmth into this, something around this color, something that I went with a final value. I'm just going to copy this over from another scene, is 1.889 and 0.83. So you can see it here. So it's a little bit more into the orange, so we're getting that nice warmth, but it's not too much. It's kind of subtle. So let's take a snapshot, restart the render. And we've just really nicely warmed that up. So I think it's looking kind of nice. That looks kind of cool. Let's turn on bucket rendering, make that a little bit faster. So that's looking better already. What we can do now is really push the intensity of this sunlight. So don't be afraid in a sort of a daylit situation or a daylit scene. Don't be afraid to really pump that light up. And this all depends on if you're a lighter and a compositor, because I worked as a lead lighter and compositor. So I was doing the lighting, rendering, and compositing. So I had sort of control over those three different stages of the pipeline. If you're working for a film company where you're only lighting, for example, then you may need to consider watching your blown out areas, because if you pass on blown out CG to the compositor, then they might complain, or they might not be happy with the lighting. It makes it very difficult for the compositor to reduce the blowout. So depending on what type of industry you're working in, that's worth considering. But I think for a really nice, realistic looking render, we really need to push the sunlight to get those nice blowout areas and the hotspots. So let's take a snapshot, and I'm going to pump this intensity multiplier up to 3. And we're going to see what that looks like. So you can see that that's added a lot more light into the scene, and you can see that it's sort of blowing out a little bit, but actually not that much, considering the fact that we're using a white material at 18% gray. When you start adding wood, the diffuse values are darker. This is all going to be a little bit darker. So I think a value of around 3 is fine. You can maybe even push it to 3.5, but I think overall that's pretty nice. Let's stop that render. I'm going to switch back and forth between the old lighting and the new lighting, and when we go back we can see how dark the shot is overall. I think we could probably even push this up on the HDRI just to maybe like 3 or 3.5, as it's looking kind of dark. But this actually worked quite well for me, this final setting, so we'll leave it as is and adjust it later. So the next step is to add in some sort of kicker lights to sort of help out the reflections a little bit. I think, and it's not very obvious right now, but this wall is looking a little bit flat. There's not a lot of reflection hitting it or specular. I like the background building, the way that's sort of blowing out a little bit. That looks really nice. This back wall I know is going to be a little bit flat, and flat here. I'm going to drop down an RS light, and we're just going to add some nice specular lights. So this is going to be our main building spec. I'm going to drag this into the viewport. So now we're inside the light, which is really cool. You can also access the light here. Lock it, so we're moving around in the light, now it's locked. And what I want to do is sort of position this to add some nice specular sort of hitting this building, which is going to give it a little bit more shape. It's also going to help sort of the cracks and chips in the plaster on this building as well. It's going to help with displacement. It's going to make things stand out a little bit more and just generally make it look less flat. So I think something around there right now. I'm not hitting this straight on because that's just going to make the building look very flat. It's going to fill in all those shadows, and we don't want to do that. We sort of want to create a little bit of shadow from it and a nice bit of specular. So I'll take this out to, I think, around there. We'll increase the light exposure. I turn the intensity multiplier down to 1, and I usually work the exposure. I never use this intensity multiplier, so I think it's just an old school way of doing it, the way I do it. So just using the exposure slider, so you're working in stops like a camera would. So I think I'm just going to keep going up. I think around like 7, I think is fine. I think maybe hitting, I don't know, something like that I think is fine. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Let's bring back the render view. Go back to the render camera. And we'll hit render again. So you can see we're getting some pretty strong lighting here. It's not looking very subtle. The shadows are very harsh. We should watch out for that because the light we're trying to fake here, like the bounce light, should be sort of ambient light coming from like the sky and bounced off the buildings. So the shadows are going to be super soft. So the first thing we need to do is increase the size of this light. And as lights get larger, the shadows get softer. We're going to tick on this normalize intensity, and you're probably wondering what this option does. I'm going to turn it on. So you notice nothing's changed. And that's because when we turn this normalize intensity on, excuse me, it basically means that no matter how large we scale this light, it won't get brighter. So usually in a real world scenario, the larger the light, the higher the intensity the light is. So ticking this basically means that no matter how large I scale this light, it's not going to get any brighter. So the brightness would be controlled via the exposure or intensity multiplier. But one thing that will happen, regardless of whether this option is ticked on or off, is if I scale this light down, the shadows will get harsher, and if I scale the light up, the shadows will get softer. So let's scale this light up to something like, I don't know, 2, and maybe something like 15, something like that. So now you can see the shadows are nice and diffused, but obviously we got this massive light intersecting with the building, so we don't want that. So one thing I'm going to do is stop the render, switch back to the render cam. I'm going to move this light out, but we're going to do this based on the object of the camera. So now we're moving it sort of in this direction with the light. Shift it this way, move this light down. I sort of want to get this That looks kind of cool. Let's push this light back. See how that's looking. And I'm always moving this in on one axis. Let's try again. Let's see what that looks like. So the light's visible. We need to turn that off. So under the light tab, we're going to tick this visible. So tick it off. So now the light disappears, but we're still getting the contribution from it. Let's turn the light up to like 9. Now it's starting to make a difference, and that's looking really cool. We're getting some nice lighting there. That's looking really nice. And look, the shadows are nice and soft, which is cool. So it's nice and subtle. So I think that's working quite nicely. We could actually move this a little bit further away from this wall, as I think it's picking up a bit of a nasty highlight there. I'm not sure why that got brighter in that case, but let's move it back to around here. Right there. See what that looks like. So if we're switching back and forth there, we're even getting nice highlights on the plant pots as well, which is kind of cool. We're getting some nice lighting hitting underneath here, which I think looks kind of cool. So you can see that's giving a lot more shape to this building. And that's what lighting is all about. It's about adding shape and really showing off the objects. But just remember as well, going back to what I was saying earlier with directing the viewer, you don't want to distract the viewer. So all these lights should be nice subtle kickers. They should be sort of, you know, just to pick out the shapes a little bit better, but they shouldn't be taking away the attention. So the main attention is on this canopy with the table. So now that I've done that, I think that's looking kind of cool. I'm not a massive lover of this highlight going down here. It looks a little bit unnatural. So maybe we could just push this light back a little bit, possibly. And just to the side, see what that looks like. Sort of losing nice reflection there. And this is more or less what I'm doing, is just sort of a wiggling game really, just to get it into place, make it look nice. I'm kind of liking the way this is reflecting up here. That's adding a lot of shape, and it feels quite natural, you know, it feels really cool. We can also maybe even add a little bit of blue into these lights. So we could, I don't know, sort of add 6,500. Let's just see what that does. It's actually made it warmer. That actually looks kind of cool. Looks quite nice with the warmth. But I think you'd probably want to go with like a sky blue color. I don't know. I think that's way too much. Let's remove some blue. We just want a subtle amount really. Nothing too obvious, you know. Everything's nice and subtle. Yeah, I think that's looking cool. We can always adjust this later. This is looking very strong on this canopy here. I'm a little bit concerned about how much light is hitting that. That seems to be taking a lot of attention. So let's look through that light again and see where we are. Okay, so we're at a pretty steep angle there. Take a snapshot. I'm just going to move this around because I don't really want this picking out that highlighted edge. That's not what I'm after. I think I'll actually just bring this light, I think, somewhere around here again, and we'll see what that's looking like. I know I did this earlier, but I just really don't want this contributing to the building to the left of this light here. Let's turn that down. somewhere like that. Maybe we can have this sort of light here. Yeah, maybe there. And there. I don't think the viewport is helping either. That's not really giving a good representation of what's happening. Let's try that. Let's see what it looks like. If not, we can always revert to what we had. And lighting is a really creative process. You know, it's fun and it's nice to sort of experiment, move lights around. Hey, that's looking really nice. So we've lost that highlight on the edge, which is good because I didn't like that. There you go. That's looking kind of cool. So we're still getting that highlight on the side of the building. Getting some nice light being kicked onto the side here. Nice highlight sort of here, coming through here on the floor. You can see it. So you can see it here. That's going to add some nice reflection to the floor tiles. We're getting nice reflection on this canopy here. So that's going to really bring out those wrinkles and creases, which was actually one of my aims. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty cool. I think I'll do a save now. So let's add another spec light in. So I'm going to copy and paste this. And also one thing that we didn't do was we only want specular contribution from this light. So we'll take a snapshot of what we just done, restart the render. And what we're going to do now is turn off the diffuse scale, single scattering, multiple scattering, and also GI. Like that. Restart the render. So this light is just contributing specular to the shot. So there's actually not a massive difference there. It wasn't doing a massive amount in diffuse, which is cool. So let's pause that. That's looking quite good. What we want to do now is pick out a little bit more shape and sort of highlight this building here. So we're getting a little bit of flooding of light hitting the building. So this is the building 2 spec light. That's the main building spec. Let's drag this into the viewport. I'll move this render view off screen for now. Drag it in. There you go. And we're just going to rotate this light. And we're going to hit the building at this kind of angle. I think somewhere around that. Like I said, not straight on. We don't want flat lighting. We always want to create shape. I think we're moving back to around there. Let's come out of the light. So when I want to move out of the light, I unlock the light. Let's just rotate that so it's at a normal angle. Render cam. We're going to need to boost the exposure of this light maybe by 1 stop, as we've moved the light a little bit further away. Take a snapshot so we can compare before and after. Before, after. So there you go. So we're adding a nice kicker light there just to help out that reflection. And it's all about creating shape. So let's see where we've come from since we started lighting this. So we started with that. We rotate the light around to this angle, and now we've got this. So we could even maybe even boost these lights up just a touch more, but it's a little bit difficult to tell without textures on the assets. But let's just try boosting these up to. So again, take a snapshot. Try boosting these lights up to, like, I don't know, just by one stop. I just want to see what it looks like. Just everything seems just a touch too dark in the scene. That's looking a little bit better. And I'm just going to boost up this light here. Yeah, I think that's looking a little bit nicer there. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. That's looking kind of cool. And maybe later on, if we're not getting enough highlight on this canopy, then we're going to need to add an additional light in just to pick out the shape a little bit better. If anything is feeling flat, we use an extra light just to bring out the shape a little bit more. But I think overall, I think that does the trick. I'm also leaving the foreground alone. The foreground should fall a little bit into darkness, but not complete darkness. Like I said, everything should be well lit. So no blacks. Blacks are ugly. You know, that's we don't want really harsh black levels in the scene. That just doesn't look good. It also makes a daylit scene look like studio lit or something. So we don't want any super black levels. But I think overall, I think that does the trick. We may need to watch out as well for how black these levels are getting under this umbrella. So in the scene, we want to read the blackest levels in the foreground, and as we progress through the scene in Z depth, the black levels should get whiter, but most of that is based on probably a Z depth pass in compositing. But I think overall that's pretty cool for the lighting. We'll start doing some texturing later on, and then maybe we can refine the lighting a little bit more later. I was going to show you this next stage in the lighting sort of later on, because I didn't actually do this part of the lighting at this stage. I carried on sort of texturing and shading, and then I did the ivy generation, as I decided to add the ivy leaves in later on. So that was sort of how the shot progressed. And then what I did once the ivy was on all of the buildings is that I took the main building ivy, so the ivy growing up this wall here, and I thought it'd be really cool to add some ivy shadows or leaf shadows, sort of obscuring the sunlight and casting nice sort of leaf shapes and shadows over the ground. And that also helps add detail to the shot. So not only can you add detail using models and textures, you can also add detail using lighting as well. So just remember that shadows are just as important as light. So I'm going to turn on my main building ivy now. Let's turn him on, and I'll take this from hidden to full geometry so we can actually see it. So that is the ivy leaves there. And then what I did is I took this ivy and I just rotated it. That's all I did. And I don't even think I used the liana in this case. I actually just used the leaves themselves. So let's just do that. Might as well just show you. It's really, really simple. So we take the main ivy, and all I do, hit enter on the keyboard so we can move it. I think I'll move the pivot point to the center of this object. So I'll go to modify and move center, or move pivot to center rather. And then I just rotated it. Just sort of move this into place here and just sort of angled it down. I mean, we want the sun to come straight through it. So I'm just going to use this one for now. We might as well. Let's turn the IV off, and we'll turn off the leaf blocker that I originally made, and let's try and move this into place so I can demonstrate sort of the process for getting these shadows looking nice. So open the Redshift render view, and we'll just fire off a render. One thing that we need to do is turn on this IV, turn on cast shadows, receive shadows, self shadows, and cast ambient occlusion. And you need to make sure that primary ray visibility is off and also secondary. So yeah, so what I did, I just moved this thing around, trying to get sort of different looks to this. Can move it backwards, and sort of my main aim was trying to get some nice shadowing over the top of here, and something like that looks really nice. Just getting a little bit of shadowing coming in the corner, I think that looks really cool. Also wanted to kind of block most of the light sort of in here, as I wanted the attention on the table, if I've not said that already before. So what we can do is, I guess you could rotate this entire thing around. That could be one way of doing it. Like that. Yes, you could do it like that. That's an interesting way. I don't think I did that the first time round. I think I just left it as it was, but gives you a different idea of what you can do with this. So more or less what I do is I just keep playing around with this until I get like a nice result. So let's put this back to, I think we'll turn this blocker on so we can see it. Wait for that to load. Turn this blocker off. And we'll see what that gives us. Turn on cast shadows, receive shadows. And the reason all of these are turned off in my scene, all of these parameters are turned off, is because I've actually proxied all the geometry out of my scene, which is dense, to save startup render times. So most of the objects that are in like this dark grey color have been proxied, and I've removed the proxies from the scene just to make it a little bit cleaner. But I'll include those proxies in the folder for you guys to use. So this is the first blocker added. So just to get a little bit of shadow coverage at the start here, and we can see we're actually blocking most of the light. So the focus is really on this area. All of this area up here is covered by the ivy leaves. So I wasn't too concerned about getting shadow up there because it's quite a dark area anyway. Then the next stage, so we'll take a snapshot. The next stage we'll be adding more leaves. So I just copied this this geometry here for the leaves, lifted it up and rotated it, and that's pretty much it. So let's add that. We'll need to enable cast shadows once it loads. And I recommend with any renderer to actually stop the renderer first and then do your adjustments. So it completely depends on what type of hardware you have really, but So there you go. So if we move back and forth, add a little bit more leaf coverage or shadow coverage, and it's added a fair amount of darkness to the scene. So we're not getting as much light, but we are getting this sort of pool of light here. What we can do is we can actually zoom out so I can see the areas that are getting hit. So we can see here, this is taking up a lot of brightness there. And like I said, there's going to be some pretty dark ivy leaves on here. So that's not going to be as noticeable. We've got an area in the background here, which is bright, but that's absolutely fine. I think maybe this area could be a little bit brighter, and also the canopy on the top. But I think for the sake of the tutorial, we'll stick with what I originally did. It would actually be, I think, nicer to maybe have more of a pool of light up here, so less shadowing. But I'll leave that down to you guys to do that. But I think overall that's added a nice amount of detail. You can see this, even the canopy just looks flatter here. The lighting is really uniform, and when we add the shadow in, it just really breaks the shot up and breaks the lighting up.